In the early 20th century in the West, animals paid a high price as a result of the Industrial Revolution. We widely exploited their capacity for hard work and their bodies. As our societies became richer, the demand for meat grew. In the abattoirs of Chicago, the biggest in the world, a cow was slaughtered every 8 seconds and a pig every 5. The race for productivity destroyed traditional animal rearing practices.
It was industry that widened the gap between humans and animals. And at that time, anything went. Unnecessary torture, unnecessary experiments, unnecessary massacres, as innocently as you like. It wasn't considered a problem because machines were doing it.
Don't worry about it hurting them. Penicillin-injected rabbits are the healthiest in the world. They seem to enjoy their job of serving mankind.
After the Second World War, science also began to use animals on a huge scale. Experiments proved increasingly popular, with no thought for the animals. They were used to help us understand how our bodies work, sleep, vision, pain, how the nervous system functions, or even to prepare for a trip into space. These were the real pioneers of the space race.
After the trip, he's released from the canister, perfectly happy after his amazing experience and no ill effects at all.
Were these space pioneers really happy? Very few people raised any questions about the physical or psychological suffering of these chimpanzees. Yet the way we viewed these great apes would gradually change, thanks to a few women primate specialists. In 1958, in the Gombe Reserve in today's Tanzania, a young woman began observing chimpanzees.
When I got to Gombe, I had no scientific background. Nobody had told me how to study the chimpanzees, and so I used my own intuition, and gradually I accumulated a whole lot of information. I got to know the chimpanzees as individuals.
She lived for months in immersion with the primates, naming each one. She discovered that chimps can make and use tools, care for each other, help each other, feel hate, fear, and love, and even make war. However, Jane Goodall's university tutors initially refuted her observations.
I'd been in the field about 1.5 years when I was told I'd done everything wrong. Chimpanzees should have had numbers, not names. I couldn't talk about them having personality or mind capable of thought, and certainly not emotions. Those were unique to us. I knew the chimpanzees had personalities. I knew that they could think. I knew that they had emotions. And gradually, thanks to my first husband arriving and filming, gradually more and more people began to understand, yes, I was right. The line between us and the rest of the animals wasn't a sharp line. The difference was one of degree, not kind.
This new perspective on animal behavior was reflected in the major protest movements of the 1960s. Militants simultaneously embraced all the major causes: the Vietnam War, racial segregation, women's rights, gay rights, and animal protection. Public opinion began to turn against seal hunting and testing cosmetics on animals.
Stop torturing animals! Most people believe that rabbits are voiceless. Whoa!
In 1980, a group of activists launched a boycott of the U.S. brand Revlon.
That small group of people chose the target of cosmetics because, firstly, nobody can say that cosmetics are something that is necessary for our survival. You know, they are not life-saving medicine. And secondly, test cosmetics, very cruel experiments were done on rabbits. The cosmetics were put directly into the eyes of the rabbits. The rabbits were held in a kind of box with only their head sticking out, so they could not scratch the eye or anything like that. And they were there for days.
At the time, Peter Singer was a young Australian philosopher who had just written a seminal work, Animal Liberation. His book inspired the anti-Revlon activists, along with a whole generation of animal rights supporters. His key message was that it is unfair to not protect animals like rabbits just because they are rabbits. We don't have the right to make them suffer things that we would not do to human beings.
The more conservative traditional animal movement had presented itself as a matter of we should love animals. I was trying to argue, no, this is not something only for animal lovers. It is a basic question of justice or a question of ethics, that we are treating animals wrongly. We are not treating them in the way that they are entitled to be treated. If a being can feel pain, its pain matters. And its pain does not matter less because it is not a member of our species.
Peter Singer's work gave rise to the notion of animal well-being, which is at the core of current regulations. The aim is to prevent unnecessary suffering. A chicken, for example, must not go hungry or thirsty. It must be treated if injured or sick. It must be protected from fear or distress, and must be allowed to behave in a natural way for a chicken. In the Department of Veterinary Science at the University of Bristol, Christine Nicol has spent her research career examining chickens. Her work on poultry well-being has led to changes in European legislation regarding the size of cages used for laying hens.
When I started, there was still lots of battery cages, and the chickens, each chicken had less space to live in than this sheet of paper. So they were really crowded. But on the other hand, farmers and other people were saying they get used to this environment and they've got plenty of food and they're protected from predators and they seem to lay lots of eggs, so what's the problem?
Christine Nicol's work proved that chickens never get used to these cages. She has been championing chicken well-being by working with some exemplary chicken farms, such as Lawn Farm. Here, there are no cages. Rachel Rivers has 1,100 free-range laying hens that have 2 hectares on which to scratch around, explore, and socialize. These are happy chickens, naturally curious ones. They have no fear of humans, and they immediately follow anyone who enters the area they share with a troop of alpacas. They keep the foxes away and are the perfect companions for the chickens. But there is a paradox about free-range chickens. It's not enough to put chickens outside for them to feel better. Indeed, the mortality rate for free-range chickens is on average higher than for battery hens.
That's a bit embarrassing, because really you would think that all aspects of welfare should be better in a free-range flock. We have too many free-range farms that are still struggling to learn how to manage the free-range birds properly. And on those farms, the health outcomes can be worse, which is not something that people normally think. So it's a big challenge for the industry to meet the consumers' expectations. Consumers don't want birds with behavioural freedom that are also ill. They want healthy birds that have behavioural freedom. You know, you've got to have both.
Because we have more educated consumers, capitalism is having to take more seriously some ethical considerations. Obviously, it is still profit-driven. It cannot not be profit-driven. That is its nature. But the consumers do have the power to influence it very significantly. And what I think we have to do is to try to continue this process of educating consumers to include ethics in their choices.
Free-range animals whose well-being is ensured at every stage of their growth. That's what the most conscientious consumers want, and what advertising generally tends to sell us. However, today, the great majority of animal products we consume come from industrial farms with intensive breeding programs where the animals rarely set foot in a field.
What does well-being mean in that case? I think that raising livestock only makes sense in relation to humans. Raising livestock cannot be industrial.
As a philosopher of science, Vincent Després has examined the relationship between animals and humans, mostly in terms of raising livestock.
Either you talk about raising livestock and you might end up with a very big herd, but it's still raising livestock, that is to say, with someone who raises the animals. Or you're talking about something industrial, and the notion of raising livestock no longer applies to the reality you're describing. You're talking about industrial production.
On the plains of Indiana, Fair Oaks Farm reveals the industrial animal production of the future, turned into a show for the American public. The major food production companies have understood what they can get out of the notion of animal well-being as a valuable marketing and sales tool.
I'm sure you've noticed the sand beds. The reason that cows are bedded on sand is that sand is inorganic. That means it will not support bacteria growth. This means it helps protect the cow's udder from infections.
A paradise, they tell you, where 36,000 dairy cattle live. But when animals are transformed into products to this extent, when they are raised by machines and no longer by people, how can one still talk of well-being?